In this video, I'm going to show you how to shoot photos for an HDR, a high dynamic range image. So the best time to use this technique is when you're taking a photo and there's such a wide tonal range, you can't get detail in the blacks and the highlights in one exposure. So in this case, we're going to take photos that get all the details in the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows so that we can combine them later in Photoshop. So one of the first things I'm doing is I'm setting up my camera on my tripod. It's really important to use a tripod for this technique so that all the photos line up. You can try hand holding, but it can sometimes be a little bit more work to get the photos to line up right, and sometimes it just doesn't work out because you move too much. So using a tripod is your best bet. This technique is really great for outdoor scenes where there's maybe shadow areas and really bright sunny areas. It's great for indoors when you're shooting and you want to get the details that's outside of the window at the same time. That's why this is really used a lot in both outdoor photography and real estate. But you could really use this for any subject where the tonal range is just too wide to capture in one photo. For this example, I set up a little scene back here behind me where I have a really white object, a black object, and some gray cards behind so we can see what's going on with all the tones. So for my settings, for this setup, first I went ahead and set my aperture. I do want some depth of field, but not a whole lot, so I went ahead and left it at 7.1. I then took my ISO all the way down to 100 because I want the finest image possible. Now, the last setting that I need to worry about is going to be my shutter speed. I need to set my shutter speed so that I can get the details in my whites. Then I will decrease the shutter speed one stop at a time so that I have a series of bracketed images. Now, some of you guys might have cameras that have bracketing available. If so, this is exactly what it's used for, HDR imaging. All right, so let's get this going. All right, so for my first exposure, I'm gonna be using 1/15 of a second. Now that's pretty slow, it's even on a tripod. So you can use either a shutter release cable or you can even use the timer. So I'm gonna set up my timer. Okay, I've got my timer set up to 2 seconds, so I'm gonna go ahead and take the first image. So here's the preview for the first image. You can see that the lights, there's a lot of details in the light areas, but the dark areas look like they've gone completely dark. Now I can change the view on my camera, and you probably can do so on yours as well, to show you the histogram, which is right here. And in this case, I also have this warning turned on for when the dark or light areas are too dark or too light. So everywhere that's flashing right now, there is basically no information. It's just completely black pixels. And you can also see my histogram here. And as we take photos, we're gonna see that the histogram is going to move. So now that I've got that, I'm gonna go ahead and slow down my shutter speed by a stop at a time. Now on digital cameras, that usually means changing the setting by 3 clicks. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that and take another photo. All right, so now rinse and repeat until you have a photo where you have a really nice detail in your shadow areas as well. Here's the next exposure, and it's looking pretty good. My whites are starting to get blown out just a little bit, but we have a pretty good even exposure. The next photo. Okay, so now you can see that I'm really starting to get the details in my black areas, but my white areas are completely blown out. Also notice how the histogram has changed. The tones have been moving over. If you're using a mobile device of sorts, like a phone or an iPad, you can still get different exposures for the darks and lights. So right now I have my iPad set up on a little cheap tripod, and I'm going to tap on the screen where I want the exposure set. Right now it's kind of just set in the middle. You can see the whites are blown out, the blacks look really black, but the grays look right in the middle. So when I tap on the screen where the white area is, you can now see that the exposure readjusts itself so that the white is properly exposed. So now I can take a photo, and now I can go ahead and tap on the dark areas. Now the big issue with this is that this also changes the focus of the image. So if your dark and black areas are really far away, this might not work as well. Now you might be asking, why don't I just use the HDR? And I'm going to go ahead and turn it on right now and take a photo. And what we'll do is going to take 2 photos and then blend them together. Now this is really great in a pinch, but the whole point of taking our own photos for an HDR is to have complete control over the tones and the look of the image. All right, and that's it. Now all we got to do is get this into Photoshop.